So what even is chat hosting, or what is a chat host? Well, a chat host is me, or it used to be me. It's not me anymore. At least the me who was a chat host is not that me anymore. But I was a chat host, and if you don't know, chat hosting is essentially just having an English conversation with a bunch of Japanese people. It's to help practice their English, and it's your job to lead the conversation. I did chat hosting for 4 months total. And even though it wasn't the longest amount of time, I have a lot of stories. So today I'm going to cover the good, bad, and ugly of chat hosting, some of the more interesting conversations I had, and then, some interesting tidbits that I kind of picked up, like what were some of the most common questions that people asked me, what were some of the common questions I asked Japanese people and their responses, and just kind of give you an insight into the wondrous world, sometimes, that is chat hosting in Japan. So a couple TLDR quickfire points about chat hosting and what it's like. First, salary. I would say, of course, the salary depends on the location you're at and your experience as a chat host, but not really. It's the same pretty much everywhere, and that is minimum wage, so 1,000 yen an hour, which translates to about $7.50, or however bad the yen is compared to the USD. It's around that. It's around the American minimum wage, which is not ideal. You really got to be doing this for the love of the game, or desperation for money, which I think is probably a more common indicator. I did this as a part-time job baito when I was a student here. Next, hours worked. So for my chat host cafe, it was 3 hours per shift. So you could take a couple different shifts per week. I think I fluctuated between 2 or 3 shifts each week, and each of those shifts were 3 hours. And 3 hours, of course, doesn't seem like a lot, but it does take a different kind of energy to continuously talk throughout these whole 3-hour shifts and lead the conversation. So I usually found myself pretty tired and pretty ready to just go and turn into a monk after each of my shifts were over. Okay, what's the average shift like? Well, basically it would just start. So my cafe had a couple different tables, I think 3 or 4 tables with 3 or 4 different hosts, and the customers would come in and they'd get seated to one of our tables. I would say on average I had anywhere between 1 sometimes, but more commonly I would probably have between 2 and 5 people at each table. Sometimes we have a lot of people. I could have up to, I think the most I ever had was about 8 people at one table. And these tables are not that big at all, so that can be pretty tiring. But on average, I think I had anywhere between 2 or 5 people, and the people would kind of come and go. So you might have someone sit down and they were charged an hourly rate. So some people would stay for 1 hour, some people would stay for my entire 3-hour shift, and they'd even stay longer as the next host came in to relieve me of my shift. But I'd say on average, people stayed anywhere between 1 or 2 hours. Okay, time for the good, bad, and the ugly of chat hosting. Starting with the good. The most obvious point is that you get to meet a lot of really cool people and a lot of really cool Japanese people. I kind of feel like when you travel here, even honestly when you live here, it's not the easiest thing to meet Japanese people. I mean, think about how hard it is to meet new people in your home country, especially as an adult. Yeah, and then multiply that times 10 for here in Japan. So this is a really great way to authentically get to meet Japanese people, and actually, if you can't speak Japanese, talk to them in English and hear about their stories. I always thought the coolest thing about a city is you'd look out at a skyline and you'd see all the buildings with lights on each building, and each one of those lights belongs to someone with their own unique story. That's the coolest thing about the city, in my opinion. And you get to meet and hear a lot of those stories and a lot of, the regular and real people who live in Japan. Also, about, I'd say 60 to 70% of our customers are regulars. So you actually get to move past the whole basic, hi, what's your name? Where are you from? Oh, that's really cool. And then you forget it and you never get past that. Because they're regulars, you can really move on to more interesting conversations, and they open up to you too. Of course, factors apply, how shy they are, how many other people are there. Sometimes you'll get a weird balance of, regulars and then brand new people. So you balance the whole hi, how are you doing? And did your dog survive the treatment? Oh yeah. Oh, you're from, Nagoya. That's really cool. Oh yeah, so your sister's wedding. So sometimes there's a weird balance. That's part of the job, but you get to really meet a lot of cool people, and you learn a lot about Japanese culture and Japanese people from them themselves and their perspective on your own culture, which is really interesting to hear their opinion. I'm American on America from their perspective, and actually have pretty open and honest debates about it. It's really neat. Also, you get paid just to talk to people. So if you're extroverted, which I am about half the time or so, it's the easiest job in the world. Of course, I do acknowledge that this job could also potentially be nightmare fuel for some type of people too. So it depends on you. But for me, most of the time, it was a pretty easy and like fun job to do. You also get a lot of good flexibility with this job. My manager, he pretty much ran the whole place by himself. He actually had his own bedroom at the back of the cafe and lived there. He was pretty chill, so I pretty much got to pick all the shifts that I wanted to work, and if I ever had to reschedule, I would just send him a message real quick, and it was pretty much never an issue. I don't know if this is true for all cafes, but at least for mine, it was pretty relaxed. Also, your coworkers are foreign, so good way to also meet other foreigners if you're struggling with that. You can be friends with your coworkers. I never became friends with my coworkers because by the time I was done talking to all the Japanese people for 3 hours, I didn't really want to talk to other people. But yeah, you totally could in theory. Another point too, it is super easy to get one of these jobs. As long as you're a native speaker, and even if you're not a native speaker, we had several non-native speakers at our cafe. I pretty much just Googled online, like chat host cafes, found one, applied, sent my resume on, did I even send a resume online? I think I might have literally just filmed out like a form online, like didn't even send a resume. Instantly got a message back about, yeah, come in for an interview. Came in for the interview, we talked for like 30 minutes and he offered me the job on the spot. So very, very easy to get one of these jobs. There's a reason for that, which I'll get to in the bad part of the section, but if you want, you could easily get one of these jobs. And also, I really think it helps with your conversational skills. If you're maybe unconfident about your conversational skills or you just want to improve upon them, you get really good at like reading a room, balancing conversation, learning to listen to others. You basically have to carry on a continuous conversation for 3 hours, and you're doing a lot of the talking. Even if you have a bunch of people at the table, they tend to want to talk to you, not each other so much, which is that's another point I'll get to later, but it really helps your conversational skills. Okay, time for the bad or the challenges. I realized that during the good points, I already started kind of like hitting on some of the negative points, especially towards the end there. The most obvious one being is this job can be very draining. It was hard for me to even talk about the good points without it like kind of segueing into that. I mentioned, I'm extroverted about 50% of the time, but when I had to work on those other 50% where I was not feeling very extroverted, man, trying to like lead the conversation and being able to be upbeat and happy and peppy for 3 hours is draining. And sometimes it's like the very last thing you want to do, especially if you're having a bad day. So also, I was kind of alluding to this point earlier as well, but it's kind of tough balancing a conversation. It's an overlooked aspect of the job that it's not like a group of friends, just everyone's hanging out and talking to each other. It's really focused on you. They're coming here because they want to talk to you, not really the other Japanese people. Of course, some of the Japanese people will talk to them, and sometimes one of my tricks is that when I was really tired, I would almost even tell them like, hey, Tanaka-san, like, Sanada-san over here also does XYZ. Isn't that crazy? What do you think about that? As in like, please talk to each other for a little bit and let me rest for a bit. And it only gets more and more complicated the more people you have at the table. The easiest conversations are actually just when it's the rare times it's like one-on-one, especially with a regular, because you can just have a very more normal conversation. But if you have a lot of people, everyone kind of wants to talk to you and not really each other. But more than that, you have to balance different personality types, right? There's a couple, especially like regulars, who are just, if it was up to them, they would talk almost like 100% of the time. I'm sure you know people like that in real life too, who don't always know how to read the room. And then you get like the really shy, quiet first timers who struggle to speak up and ask any kind of question, and maybe their English level isn't that good, right? So they're really shy, and you really have to prompt them to speak up. I remember I had one really sweet, shy regular who would come pretty frequently, and he would always just like keep his head down. He would never even look up, and he would not speak at all unless like I directly asked him a question, and he'd give like a short 1 or 2 word answer. Like sometimes it almost didn't feel like he wanted to be there, but I think he probably was like shy or had anxiety, so like props for him for coming at all. But sometimes like balancing that when you have a couple people who really just want to talk a lot at the table can be kind of difficult, especially if it's a topic maybe not everyone's super interested in whatever we're talking about and they want to move on with the topic or something else. So yeah, balancing the conversation really, you have to kind of be on top of it the whole time. You have to constantly not only be thinking about what you're saying, but thinking about, is everyone getting equal time to talk? Is this conversation interesting everyone? Does everyone look engaged? Who doesn't? How can I help them? Is someone shy? What do I need to ask them to like bring them into the conversation? Have we been talking about this for too long? Should I move? You're constantly kind of thinking about that. So yeah, it's pretty draining on that front as well. So I already kind of alluded to this point last time as well, and that's like you're dealing with different English levels. Everyone's at a different English level, and when you get a new person, one of your jobs is to assess their English level. We don't have like a test or anything. There's no like Duolingo level skill check they take at the beginning. They just get seated at a table. It's kind of up to you as the host, and usually it's pretty easy to tell where they are English speaking wise. And with your regulars, you obviously know where their English level is. Because this is a cafe, a conversational cafe, it's really not for like brand new people who are just starting to learn English. We don't turn anyone away, but it is kind of like told to them that it's like, hey, you probably at least want to have conversational English already, so you don't have someone who, you know, basically needs a lesson and can only say like colors with, you know, regulars who actually want to talk. Because that can be kind of annoying too for the people who can speak English already, if they have to like just sit there and listen to me trying to, you know, just get through a couple hello, what's your favorite color, like type of conversations with someone if I can tell their English level is like really, really low. We did have beginner nights. About once a week we had nights at the cafe that were specifically for people with very low English levels. These nights felt a lot more like classes. Everyone's English level was at about the level of knowing some color names, knowing the sentence I like, then kind of, you know, a noun can go there, being able to introduce themselves and where they're from, and that's kind of it. So those nights could really be like pulling teeth in conversations. You try to fill a 3-hour conversation slot with someone whose vocabulary is limited to about 50 different words, and that's kind of it. Pro tip, talk about anime a lot because they know the names and it's easy for them to say, I like this, I know this. Oh my gosh, you like Frieren? I love Frieren. Have I told you about my 10-minute Frieren rant? Like, no? Well, you'll have to wait till next lesson because, you know, the English level is probably not there to go beyond just naming names of the shows and characters. But it's a good pro tip if you ever want to try to talk to a Japanese person, even if you know like no Japanese or vice versa, bring up anime. The universal language in Japan is anime. Okay, next point. The pay. Yeah, okay, it's one of the negatives. It's not great. Moving on. Okay, time for the ugly. You can probably guess some of these. I have 2 main points here to talk about. So I don't know why, if it was just coincidence or it was just the people who tended to go for the jobs, but at least at my cafe, about 90% of the hosts were women and about 90% of the customers were men for whatever reason. So sometimes, and most customers were very respectful and understood that on some level, this job is transactional. Like, I would not be there if I was not getting paid. That's just how it works. But there's a couple who wouldn't either, especially there's some regulars who wouldn't. There was one regular who, like this older Japanese guy, who would always make really uncomfortable compliments towards me, and he'd ask about like my love life a lot of the time, which is not very exciting, by the way, even. And it just really felt uncomfortable. I feel like he kind of had an understanding of exactly like what line to not cross explicitly, but he'd always like push against it, and it was always, I've never liked it when he showed up. And I tried to talk to my manager about it, but we don't have an HR. My cafe was literally run by like one, like, you know, the one guy who like slept there, and in very Japanese typical manners, he'd just be like, oh yeah, that's tough, yeah, you probably shouldn't be doing that, yeah. And then he'd do nothing about it. He wouldn't even like talk to the customer because frankly, he didn't want to, and it was a paying customer, and he didn't do anything like, you know, too over the top or anything like that. Another time I had a younger Japanese customer, and of course at the table we only speak in English, and they of course assume I only speak English. I guess that's a common assumption when you see white people in Japan that Japanese people make. And he turned to one of his friends he brought, and in Japanese he says to his Japanese friend, oh, you know, I'm gonna try to ask her out. And I'm just sitting there like, because I can understand him. So that was very uncomfortable as well. I did tell him in Japanese, like, no, you're not. And then he left very promptly after that, and he did not come back. So yeah, that's kind of part of the job, it seems. Definitely my least favorite aspect of it, unfortunately. Okay, my other point is that surprisingly, in most of these conversations, we would talk about pretty like in-depth topics like politics a lot of the time, world and current events, relations between different nations, history, things like that. So with this comes potentially, you know, some uncomfortable topics a lot of the time too. Especially you get varying viewpoints among everyone at the table. So if you're talking, like, a lot of the customers surprisingly had a big interest in American politics, which, I know a lot about and I follow pretty closely. But some of the conflicting opinions could be very delicate to handle, but it would happen a lot. And I would start to know, especially with my regulars, I kind of knew where they would stand on a lot of positions and whatnot, and what topics to avoid and what to try to like not linger on too much, and what were like safe topics. So it could be a little difficult. An interesting point too is that I've been told, in Japan, there's this whole element of like, don't rock the boat. The whole Japanese language is kind of set up for that. There's very like key phrases and responses in Japanese, and there's even a hierarchy in Japanese, where if someone's older, you have to speak to them respectfully and not really speak your true thoughts. There's very much that culture. But a lot of my customers have told me that they really like speaking in English, especially meeting new people, because they feel like they're a lot more free to say things in English. So I think a lot of them would use these like chat host sessions as a way to like actually speak about topics they probably wouldn't in Japanese to other Japanese people, but in English it's almost kind of like a hall pass or a free pass to kind of speak their minds. Thank God, I need some water. I haven't talked that long consecutively since I was a chat host. Oh my goodness, my throat is all dry. That's another thing, I used to have to have like water constantly, like from talking that long. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about a couple chats that I stand out in my memory that I particularly remember because I was kind of surprised, and a lot of these have to do with learning about different aspects of Japanese culture, which I wasn't aware of before. So one of them was with my regular that I had, and he's like a middle-aged Japanese guy, and he had just gotten married. Omedetou, like very exciting, and he was telling me about his wedding. So it was really interesting hearing about a Japanese style wedding, which is very different. First off, they had it in a chapel, but not really a chapel. It wasn't a church. It was just a hotel, but they had a room in there that was decorated like a chapel because, only like 2% of Japan is Christian. Most of them aren't even really like religious, but they like the aesthetic of getting married in like a Western style chapel. So that's very trendy right now. So that was like the first thing. They got married in some chapel in a hotel like ballroom. So that was the first kind of like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And then the other interesting thing is, of course, as a lot of people know in Japan, there's a big emphasis on that your company is your family. So at your wedding, in the front row, it's not your mom, dad, closest like family members. You put your bosses in the front row. So you put your bosses from work in the front row, and your family actually sits in the very back. And during the reception, your bosses are the ones that give a speech at your wedding ceremony, not like your family members, or they don't do like bridesmaids or groomsmen or maid of honor or anything like that. So the bosses give the speech. And the idea kind of is that like you and your family are the host, right? So that's why they sit in the back and everything. So it's kind of like the idea that you're hosting them and your bosses are the ones who have taken care of you, like through your job and paid your salary, and they're like your family, so they're given like the privilege in a wedding. So that was so interesting for me to hear, just a completely different way of thinking about it. And for me personally, I don't care how well I got along with my manager, he is not giving a speech at any kind of like hypothetical wedding I have. How would y'all go if your boss like gave a speech? Would it be great? Would it be epic? Would it be terrible? I'm very curious. The other thing, and actually my Japanese friend is getting married soon, and I'm very excited for her. She invited me to her wedding. I'm going, so I'll get to experience like an actual Japanese wedding. There's one thing I'm worried about, which is in Japanese weddings, you don't give a gift. It is customary to give money instead, and in particular the base amount for just like, and it varies depending on how close you are, how old you are, and how much like money people are kind of aware you make, but the base amount is you have to give around $300 to the couple. There's a special envelope in Japan that you use for this, and the bills have to be new too, by the way. You have to go and like get brand new bills, otherwise it's considered rude, which you have to pay more to get the brand new bills too, but you have to put like the 3 bills in the envelope, and that's like what you present as the wedding gift. So it's pretty expensive. Which is why I was kind of like debating whether to go to the wedding or not in the first place, but I was like, I should go. And the other thing is, I'm really excited about my friend's wedding too, because another common trend is our mutual white friend, complete white guy, they hired him to be the priest. He's not a priest, but he's gonna dress up in like a priest costume and in bad like Japanese give the speech. and that fits into like the chapel aesthetic. So I'm so excited to see my friend do that at my Japanese friend's wedding. But yeah, they also don't really have a big reception dance party. There's a dinner usually after the reception, but it's just a dinner where they'll do speeches, but then there's no like big party afterwards. Everyone just kind of goes home after that. So yeah, it was really interesting to learn about a Japanese wedding, and I was kind of explaining to him, you know, the counterpoint of, oh, that's so different from how we do it in the West. And I was explaining to him, you know, in the West, we prioritize our family and it's about that. And no one would ever have their boss speak. You'd be psychotic. People are like, are you okay? Like if you had your boss speak at your wedding. So it was an interesting conversation to have back and forth, the differences of it. Okay, the next conversation was with one of my lovely female regulars who's around my age. She's one of my favorites to talk to. She was moving to Australia, which is part of why she was coming to the chat host, because she wanted to practice her English. I did my best Aussie accent for her, but it wasn't super impressive. She actually did, that was an actual request she made of me, because she wanted to practice listening to the Australian accent. I kind of told her, like, well, just because I'm native English, it doesn't mean I can just switch over and be like, "G'day, mate, toss some shrimp on the bob." Okay, sorry, I'm so sorry. I couldn't do it then either. I can't do it now. But anyway, she was telling me about the horror story at her work about trying to quit, because she worked for an all-Japanese company. Obviously, she's Japanese, and she needed to quit. So when she got hired on, she'd been working at this Japanese company for 2 years now. And in Japan, you have to give a 1 month notice in order to quit your job. So she did that, but then HR called her in just kind of unexpectedly after she gave her 1 month notice, and they kind of sat her down and they started like scolding her. They told her like, hey, you know, it's an unspoken thing that when you work here, you're supposed to work 3 years minimum here. And she was like, well, that wasn't in the contract. And they're like, yeah, but it's expected to be known. And you know, once again, in Japan, there's this kind of like expectation to follow these kind of like unwritten rules. And they kept trying to like almost interrogate her and ask her, like, you realize that what you're doing is completely disrespectful to the company, and that you've gone about this all incorrectly. And she basically just had to sit there and be like, yes, screw you, but yes, yeah, And so she told me, like, she sat there for like an hour with them berating her about her choice to like leave the company. And then finally she just told them like, okay, that's it, can I leave now? And of course, like, what can they really do? They're trying to essentially shame her into staying with the company, especially because in Japan, it's way less common for people to leave a company. The idea is you're supposed to work there for life. It's like that whole your company's your family thing, and you're supposed to stay loyal, and in return, your boss gets to speak at your wedding, you know, I guess is the trade-off there. Most Japanese people don't even use LinkedIn. Like, it's bad to have a LinkedIn because that signals to your company, if they were to find your profile, you'd get in trouble because it might look like you're trying to like search and find another job. So a lot of Japanese people don't even use LinkedIn. It's kind of that mindset. So her company was not happy with her. And then after she left, the company sent a company-wide email out to every single employee, basically saying, we have an employee who has determined to leave us on her own. This is not the principles. My client or my customer showed me this email that they got sent. And the email basically is like, this is not the principles that the company stands for, and someone has chosen to leave within a month after not working here for 3 years, and I would just think that everyone would respect and admire the principles of what our company is, blah, blah, blah. Like, this whole thing basically, like, they didn't mention her by name, but she told me that everyone in the company pretty much knew it was about her, just like shaming her in this like really long email. The email was like 4 or 5 paragraphs long. I'm like, oh my God, the passive aggressiveness is unreal. Kind of reminds me, like, in a lot of Japanese companies, they can't really fire you, but what they do instead is they make life so miserable for you, so passive aggressively, that you need to quit, that they make you basically quit and leave on your own, because they can't actually really fire you. Like, firing someone in Japan is extremely difficult. Part of that whole, you work your entire life at a company. So yeah, just more reasons where I'm like, okay, definitely I would not recommend working at a all Japanese company, especially some of the more traditional ones. Probably not a great idea. So like I said, even though we had some in-depth conversations, I can pretty much tell you how every single first conversation would go, and there's some things that we talked about all the time. So now I'm going to talk about some conversation topics and some questions that got brought up constantly, some questions I like to ask them, and just, you know, how most conversations would go a lot of the time. So 99.9% of the time, almost like clockwork, the Japanese person would instantly sit down after introducing yourselves. Hi, my name is so-and-so. What's your name? My name is Alyssa. They would always ask, and this is the number one question in Japan, like, where are you from? Number one question that I get asked. So they'd always ask me that. I'm from Dallas. And then they'd always have to be like, oh, JFK. Like, yep, it's our claim to fame. It's a good one. They're like, oh, you know, he got shot. And I'm like, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do. They made us watch the video in high school, actually, of him getting shot. That's a core memory for me, too. And then I'd ask them where they're from, and they're like, Japan. I'm like, oh, yeah, I know, I kind of figured, but like, where in Japan, you know, potentially. And then they were always like excited if I knew where the town was, especially if it was a smaller town that wasn't as well known. I didn't always know, but I knew some of the time. And then usually I would ask them, because their English is usually probably pretty good, I pretty much always complimented their English to like make them feel comfortable and confident in it. So I pretty much always be like, oh, your English is so good. Where did you learn it? Did you live abroad? And you know, you can usually tell if someone's lived abroad versus if they taught themselves English. You know, pronunciation's usually the biggest thing. The people who lived abroad usually had much better pronunciation. The people who self-taught had very Japanese pronunciation. But you get really good at like understanding the Japanese pronunciation, the Japanese accent in English anyways. Most people did live abroad, but there's a couple self-taught people, which is really, really impressive. Really difficult to do when not living in a foreign country to like learn and be able to speak conversationally that language. So very impressive. I also like to ask them I wanted to like create a poll just out of curiosity, what their favorite food was. And I don't know if this was like something programmed into them, but I swear to God, 9 out of 10 Japanese people, I don't even remember a single time they didn't answer this, would say sushi. It's like a stereotypical answer. It's like what you would like think they would say, but be like, no, that's such a stereotype. No, but it's like 9 out of 10 Japanese people say sushi. It's the funniest thing. I would even start like being like, oh, what's your favorite food? I bet it's sushi. And they'd be like, how did you know? And I'm like, I don't know, because every Japanese person says sushi. I think one of the things is like, even though we think of sushi as something Japanese people have all the time, it's actually more of like a special occasion, like celebratory type of thing. So it's seen as like the special treat. So I think that probably has something to do with it. And also it's just really good in Japan as well, I guess. But yeah, sushi is like the number one answer I'd get all the time for that. I thought it was so funny. I continued asking it just to like see, and yeah, 9 out of 10, I swear. Okay, and then some questions that like I got asked a lot. Most common questions were obviously where I'm from. Dallas, JFK, Texas, yep. And then, cowboys. They always wanted to talk to me about cowboys. And I was like, I always was very sad to tell them that I wasn't like a cowboy and stuff. I did take horseback riding lessons for a little bit though. They were always excited about that. The two things they know about Texas, cowboys and JFK. And actually, weirdly enough, a lot of Japanese people, especially older ones, knew the show Dallas, the TV show that I guess was filmed in Dallas. I've never actually seen it, but a lot of Japanese people knew that, surprisingly. You know, I also got asked all the time like why I'm in Japan, and that's just a common question even like other foreigners ask you a lot, because everyone kind of has a reason. Yeah, I got my little answer down pretty pat on that one. I think I've talked about it before in my other videos. Got asked that all the time. Why am I in Japan? Singapore was too expensive, basically. Nah, not really, but I also got asked a lot if I liked anime, if I liked Nintendo, if I liked Ghibli, basically if I liked Japanese things and Japanese food, which of course I do. I like all of those. So that was always an easy way to segue into some other topic. Like I said, the anime topic, pretty common, and like Ghibli films, things like that. So yeah, that was my experience working as a chat host. What do you think? Would you guys do it? Did it sound interesting? Did it sound like a nightmare for some of you? I'm really curious if you guys would even want to do it. Let me know, or anything you found interesting or that stood out. I'm really curious to hear y'all's thoughts on this, because this was a really interesting thing that I discovered like when I came here that I don't think we really have like in the States or anything, and it's a really unique chance and opportunity. So let me know y'all's thoughts, and thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Jane. Look, can you guys tell my eyes? They're not brown like everyone thinks. They're hazel. See? Hazel. Just to make that clear.